Welcome to Statistics in Excel video number 32. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on my YouTube channel, then click on my college website link, and you can download this workbook, Business 210 Chapter 2, Extra Frequency Distribution Notes. If you're enrolled in the class, just go to our college website. Hey, in this video, I just want to summarize how to make a frequency distribution and distinguish between when we make a frequency distribution with integers. Later, we'll see that that means discrete because there's gaps. And decimals. Later, we'll see that that's continuous. Now, pivot tables. We're going to do pivot tables and formulas. Pivot tables in particular automatically know when the data is integers. You can see our integers are here, audit time in hours, and we've rounded to the hour. If we look over here, we have not rounded to the hour. We have fractions of an hour here. And when we do a pivot table, it will interpret this data differently and then this data, and the labels will come out. All right, I want to create a pivot table from this data, and I want to group. Actually, we can look down here. This is the grouping we want. We want to group from 0 up to 9, 10 up to 19. So we get groups like this. These are hours. And when we do integers, because these are integers or whole numbers in our case, the pivot table will include the lower limit and the upper limit in its count. Let's compare that over here. When we have decimals here, when we do a pivot table, it's going to go 0 up to 10. Notice over here it says 0 up to 9. The 9 is included in this group, and so is the 0. But when we have decimals like this, the pivot table will say 0 up to 10. But guess what? This upper limit will not be included. So we're going to change. We're going to create labels that say 0 up to 10, which means 0 is included, but 10 is not for this particular category. All right, let's do the pivot tables first, then we'll look at formulas. Again, this is just a summary. We've already done all this. So it's going to be kind of fast paced. All right, I'm going to click here. Our pivot tables are here. We're going to use the keyboard shortcut, Alt. And we see an N, and we see a V, we see a T, we hit T. So Alt, N, V, T. That's in 2007. Earlier versions, it's Alt, DP. All right, we want to put this on a new sheet. It got the data. We're going to say New Sheet and click OK. Now I want to drag the audit time to our row labels. In earlier versions, you can drag it over here, but we're in 2007, so I'm going to drag it right here. And just like that, we get our data. We can come over here and right-click Group, because we want to group these. This is quantitative data, integers, and we want to group. Now here's the trick. When we're doing integers like this, we're going to start at 0. Our largest number is going to be 59. And we're going to group by 10. The only difference, if this was decimals, is you'd say have this number equal 60. And we'll see that in just a moment. I'm going to click OK. And just like that, we have 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29. Now we simply drag our audit time down to the values. And just like that, we have our frequency distribution with grouped labels. Notice 0 up to 9, both of those numbers, the lower limit and the upper limit, is included for this count. Now I'm going to highlight this whole table here and Control X to cut, because I don't want this on this sheet. I want to put it over here, right here. So you can actually, not only can you put a pivot table on a separate sheet, but you can actually highlight it. And notice there's this page field up here, which is a filter. We'll see how to use that later. You want to highlight the whole thing and then Control X. Click over here, and I'm going to click in cell D4 and Control V. That way we can compare our pivot table results to our formula results. Now I want to show you how to do it with a formula. Actually, before we do it with a formula, I want to name this range. Now here's how a quick, excellent way to name a range. We have our field name at the top, or our variable name. Highlight that variable or field name. Highlight all the way down to the bottom. And the keyboard shortcut to name all of the numbers, this field name is Control-Shift F3. Control-Shift F3. I have some notes over here if you want a note of that. Hey, it says, where is your name in the top row? Click OK. Now we can simply click there, come to our drop down and click on it, and we can see that it highlights it, and we got it right. Now we're going to use that name a lot. I'm going to zoom this in. All right, so I'm going to show you how to make these labels here based on this. And this is slightly different than what we saw earlier. This is the integer version. Then our label for if we're going to make a chart. And then I'm going to show you 3 different formulas. This will be the one we tend to use in this class. All right, so I've deleted all the data. The first lower limit, I'm going to say equals, and then down here in our assumption area, hey, that's the low end of the first group, tab, and then equals 1 cell to my left, plus our increment, and I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it. Now, this would give us 10, so we actually have to subtract 1 because we're doing integers. If we're doing decimals in just a moment, we'd leave that off. Control Enter. Now watch this. Equals 1 cell up and 1 cell to my right plus 1. Control Enter. Now we can click and drag this one down 1. Highlight both cells, point to our fill handle, and click and drag. And sure enough, we have our upper and lower limits for integers. Now I'm going to highlight the whole range, and in the active cell at the top here, I'm going to make my label equals the low limit, ampersand, shift 7, and double quote, dash, double quote, ampersand. And then click on the 9. So we didn't use up to. We're just going to use a dash, which will indicate to us that both limits, lower and upper, are included. Control Enter to populate all the cells with our formula. Now I want to do our count if formula. You highlight the whole range, and in the active cell at the top, we're going to say equals count if, and we saw this one before. We're actually going to have to use our whole range. Now remember, it was audit time hours or something, but I don't remember what the name was. Oh, but F3 gives us our paste name dialog box, and we can double click on audit time. Again, I have notes over here for those keyboard shortcuts. Comma, and what is our criteria? Just as we did before, we're going to have to take the upper limit and subtract everything below it, and then our lower limit and subtract everything below that. In quotes, double quote, less than. Now, earlier when we did our decimals, we just left it there at less than. But now we have to say equal to, because guess what? Our upper limit is included in this count for this class. Then we use our ampersand and click on our 9. Close parentheses. Now I want to just highlight this right here because I'm such a bad typer. Control C. I'm going to click at the end and minus and paste that because we need to do our second. We need to take everything below the upper and subtract everything below the lower. Now I'm going to, in quotes, double quote, less than. Notice we're going to say less than 0. Now for this first one, it doesn't make any sense because we don't have any negatives. But down here, it'll make sense. Everything less than 20. When we say less than 20, that means if there's a 20, it's included in this class. So just a less than, double quote, ampersand, and then click right there. Close parentheses. OK, now compare. You're doing this on a test. If there's integers like this, the only difference between the way we did it earlier when they're decimals and these integers is that we had to put an equal sign there. And you can come back and study this and compare these two sheets if you want. Control Enter to populate this formula into all the cells. And sure enough, we get our count. Now, if you like using 2007 functions, this may be even better. However, earlier versions, especially if you're sharing your workbooks, because lots of people still don't have 2007, this function is not in earlier versions. But it is great for exactly this. Count ifs. Remember, we have 2 criteria. Count everything less than or equal to this. But for the count ifs, we're going to have to say greater than or equal to the 10. Now, if those of you in the class that just want to use the 2 count ifs, you can just turn your brain off and not pay attention to the rest of these and just use this because it'll work just fine. But here it is. Highlight all the cells. Top active cell, light colored cell, equals count ifs. Notice the only difference is an S. The criteria range, I'm going to hit F3. Double click that. Comma. Notice it says criteria range. Comma. And then criteria, we're going to put in double quotes less than or equal to in double quote ampersand this 9. So that's the first criteria. It has to be less than or equal to this. Now, comma, and I'm going to hit F3 and double click that again because the criteria range 2 is the same range. Comma. Now, let's pause a moment here. When you're using countifs, the logical tests are and, A and D. So we have both of these things are going to have to be true. So what's true to be in this class? Less than or equal to this. Greater than or equal to the low end. So now I'm going to, in double quotes, greater than or equal to, and double quote, ampersand, the low end. And that will work. Close parentheses, and then Control Enter to populate all the cells. Now let's just come down here, and you can see we have a less than or equal to this 29 and a greater than or equal to this C19. Now if you do have 2007, sometimes the logic of how this works is more straightforward than the two countif and subtractions. Control Enter. All right, now one last method for integers only. And this method will we're going to use the frequency function, and it's a special kind of function. It is an array function. And the frequency function automatically includes the upper end. And we only have to refer to the upper end. All right, so you ready? Frequency function. And I have some notes here. Now for this class, you do not have to do this. You can even turn your brain off. But this is something you may see out there in the working world. So this is good at least to see it once here. This is an array formula. You have to highlight all the cells in advance. Remember over here, when we did our countif, we could have done it in one cell and then pointed to our fill handle and copied it down. But forget it. You cannot do that with an array formula. And a frequency function is an array function that it will enter as an array formula. And there's a special keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-Enter. So you ready? Highlight all the cells, equals frequency, and it needs the data and the bins. Now the bins, it only wants the upper limit. So all you have to do for frequency is highlight the upper limit. Now the data, I'm going to hit F3 and double click that. And then comma, and the bins, you just give it the upper end, and it knows to do the rest. When it sees a 9 here, it will include that and everything less. 19, it knows to include the 19, but everything below it, all the way to but not including 9. Remember, for our class here, we had 10. So it will automatically see everything below 19. And it could even go below this 10. It would never include the 9, the upper limit from the next group. So we will get mutually exclusive categories. Close parentheses. And you don't have to lock any of these cell references either. Now watch this array formula. Hold Shift and Control at the same time. So I'm pushing both of them down and then tap Enter. So there you go. And notice there's curly brackets up there, little curly brackets. That tells you it's an array formula. Scroll over just for your edification in case you see this out in the working world. There are some other ways to, some other formulas you may see. So here's a sum product with a double negative. The sum product will take trues and falses from this statement right here. The double negative converts them to ones and zeros. Again, it will do the second condition here. And the double negatives will convert the trues and falses to ones and zeros. And then the sum product will multiply. Anytime it gets a 1 here and a 1 here, that's a 1 for adding. And so it counts. Another way to do it is not with a double negative, but with a multiplication. Still another way to do this, just in case you see this out there in the working world, you see sum, just sum, and in parentheses the multiply. And this one is an array formula, so you have to use Control-Shift-Enter to enter. All right, so for the class, pivot table, totally awesome, quick way to go when you have integers. Just be sure that you understand 0 to 9 and how to type in the grouping. By the way, as I mentioned, the notes over here, I have a screen shot for the integers and for the decimals. All right, and if you're going to do the formulas, you can do whichever one you want. Perhaps this one, since we've been using this one in the class for other things, is the way you want to go. Now, let's go over and do decimals. Come over here. Now, decimals. We're going to do a pivot table first. I'm going to do Alt-NVT, do our pivot table. I'm going to put it on a new sheet. Click OK. Drag audit time down to row labels. Come over here, right-click, group. And here, remember, the only difference is going to be our upper limit. So I'm going to say 0, tab, 60. Remember, for integers, we did 59. And then by 10 is OK. Click OK. Now, as we saw in earlier videos, that is not a very good label. It doesn't tell the viewer that the upper limit is not included here. The 10 is not included here, but the 10 is included here. So what I like to do is highlight the whole range and then Control F. For find, click on replace. I'm going to say find what? The dash. Replace it with what? Space up, space to space. And then click replace all because we've highlighted all of the cells. Replace all. Just like that, it replaces all of them. So that makes our label much more explicit. Then we can simply drag our values down here. 10 up to 0 up to 10, 0 up to and not including 10, 10 up to and not including 20. There is our frequency distribution for decimals or continuous data. I'm going to Control X, and I'm going to do that same thing we did over here. Notice inserted sheet 5. I'm going to click on this and click in C4, Control V for paste, just so we can compare. Now, let's do the same thing over here. We want to name this range. I'm going to click in the top cell and Control Shift down arrow to highlight all the way down. And then I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut Control Shift F3. And it creates names from selection. There's the top row. We click OK. Now, wait a second. You're asking, we have 2 audit times. This is the same label as over here. Remember? Oh, no. We better go look. Let's do our drop down here. Oh, audit time. Huh. Why is there only 1? Now, I'm going to give you another keyboard shortcut here. Control F3. Control F3 opens up our list of names. And I want to just mention this is 2007. This is called Name Manager. In earlier versions, it's called Define Name. But there it is. There's a scope category in 2007. You don't see this in earlier versions. FD2. That means that that name audit time is only, and you can see this is the decimals, it is only on the sheet F2, FD2. This other one says audit times workbook. That means that one is available throughout the whole workbook. So if you're on any other sheet besides FD2, this name will be used. This is called scope. This existed in earlier versions, but they just didn't have it explicitly listed here. So that's why it's perfectly all right to have audit times on individual sheets. We're on sheet F2. You can see right here. So when we use the name audit time hours, it will come from this data right here. Now, notes over here. Notice I have all those keyboard shortcuts right there. All right, I'm going to blow this up. So here we have our lower and upper. And notice I was very careful. It says lower included, upper not included. We are not going to do this when we have decimals or continuous data. The upper one is not included. Now I'm going to show you how to create all these. Actually, just remind you, go back over here to FD2. And you see these both are included. Don't forget that for your test. Now let's create our label equals, or our lower limits. I'm going to click on that one and then tab equals 1 cell to my left plus, and now we just do the straight 10 and hit your F4 key to lock it. Enter. Equals 1 cell up and 1 cell to my left. That's a relative cell reference. And then click down, drag it once, copying. Then you can highlight both of these and click and drag down. So now we have our categories. We're going to do our label here. All the cells highlighted, active cell at the top equals 2 cells to my left, and then ampersand, shift 7, the join symbol, double quote, space up, space 2, space, end double quote, ampersand, and then the upper limit. And Control Enter to populate all the cells. Now do our 2 COUNTIFs. We should already know how to do this one by now. We've done it so many times in this class. Equals COUNTIF. And we're going to say the range. I'm going to hit F3, audit time hours, comma, and then our criteria is going to be in double quotes less than, end double quotes, ampersand, that one. So you want to say everything below it. because it's not included in this class. Close parentheses. Then I'm going to say minus countif. And then I'm going to hit F3 to paste that name, comma, and then in double quotes, less than, end double quote, ampersand, and the lower limit. If we say less than this, that number will be included in the count for this class. Close parentheses, and then Control Enter. But before I can Control Enter, just compare so you don't make a mistake on the test. Less than, these are decimals, so that will work. The only difference between our earlier formulas, we had an equal sign there. I'm going to populate all the cells, Control and Enter. Notice I'm just hitting Control and Enter, and it populates all the cells. All right, and then the count ifs, some people that are using 2007 like this, it's a little bit logically more straightforward. So I'm going to say equals count ifs. Criteria range, F3, double click, comma, and the criteria is going to be double quote, less than, double quote, ampersand. And we're going to click on our 10 because everything less than that is included. And we need to do a logical and here. So I'm going to hit comma, and we have our criteria range 2, F3, double click that paste name, comma, and our criteria 2. This is the count if, so we have to say greater than or equal to the lower class limit. Because remember, anything that fits in this class, greater than or equal to this, less than this. So I'm going to say double quote, greater than, equal to, and double quote, ampersand, which is the join symbol, and click on that lower limit. So we have our criteria. Count ifs, a little bit different logical structure than our two count ifs. If you like that, you could use that. Control Enter to populate that formula into all the cells. Similarly to our integer example, for these decimals, you may see something like this sum product. That's with double negative. You may see this sum product with multiplying. And still further, you may see something like this sum entered as an array formula, Control-Shift-Enter. But for us, no problem. This pivot table, absolutely awesome way to go. Or if you want to build your labels like this and do your two count ifs, that's fine. Now, why in the world would you want to do one over the other? Most of the time, the pivot table is just the best way to go by far. Occasionally, people like formulas. It's a little bit more dynamic. You can do things like change the limits here if you build a formula. So if I had 5, and then you could see that instantly everything updates. So that's the only reason you want to do 5. For us in this class, the pivot table will work just fine. So here is the decimals, 0 up to 10. Here is the integers, 0 to 9, both included. All right, we'll see you next chapter.